Greetings to the people, greetings to the people. It's Mike Lawson Jr. from Cannabis Media Collective, and today we're going to have a clinical conversation about cannabis and post-traumatic stress and how cannabis works to ease the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. But I've been really wanting to do this content because too often we have our mental health professionals, clinicians, therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, who don't know enough about cannabis. And so they're quickly to throw their clients who are cannabis consumers under the bus as weed heads, pot heads, base heads, smokers, stoners, substance abusers, right? When we know that's not the case. We know that for a significant number of people, cannabis is an excellent tool to cope with symptoms of post-traumatic stress. But people talk about that, but what do they really mean? What are they saying, right? And then too often we have our cannabis professionals, whether retailers, producers, manufacturers, bud tenders, you name it, sellers of the product who are not well versed in mental health. And so I'm here to bridge that gap between mental health and cannabis so we can have open conversations in a clinical, academic, scholarly way to really understand how this plant is helping millions of people around the world, right? Post-traumatic stress is talked about often, but I think the average citizen may not be aware of what the 5 criteria are for post-traumatic stress, what the individual symptoms are, and don't be alarmed if you self-diagnose yourself. I did the same thing 12 years ago when I started my master's in clinical mental health, and I was shocked to discover that, I had been struggling with post-traumatic stress for most of my life, and it was no coincidence that I'd also been using cannabis for most of my adult life, starting when I was right around 18, 19, or really 18. And I started to understand how valuable this plant was in my life, and I had no clue until I started my master's program. So we're gonna take a deep dive, everybody. I'm reading directly out of the DSM, so this is not some haphazard anecdotal conversation about my experience. I have been coping with post-traumatic stress for most of my life since I was 10 years old, since I witnessed a murder at Westchester Park, Los Angeles, California, 1993. And so millions of us are coping with many symptoms of post-traumatic stress, some more elevated than others. But no matter what, cannabis helps manage these symptoms. It helps us be centered and move forward in our healing, right? And we're going to talk about what those 5 criteria are, right? Number 1, exposure. Exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. And there are other criteria that fall under that, but like I said, we'll dive into that in a moment. 2, intrusion symptoms, right? Memories, dreams, flashbacks, reactions. 3, avoidance of stimuli associated with the traumatic event. So anything that was associated with that event, you're trying to avoid that. Avoid people, avoid places, avoid things, times of day, different settings in which might resemble that traumatic event, right? 4, negative cognition and mood. So basically thinking negatively and being in a bad mood. There are several specific symptoms that fall under that, and that's really important. That's number 4. Number 5 is changes in arousal and reactivity, and that's important, and that tends to be sometimes the most pronounced symptom because a lot of times, a lot of people, that's one of the most pronounced symptoms of post-traumatic stress, and in my opinion, with the clients that I've seen, and just also in my personal experience. So let's get into it, or let's repeat for those taking notes. Exposure, intrusion, avoidance of stimuli, negative cognition and mood, changes in arousal and reactivity. Those are the 5 criteria of post-traumatic stress, right? So let's take a deeper dive into the actual symptomology behind that. So, like I said, we're coming straight out the DSM. I'm going to try not to be the most boring person as possible, but I want people to have the information. This is important. So exposure to actual or threatened death. You have direct exposure. You can witness this event. You can learn of this event. And then you can experience repeated exposure to aversive details of the traumatic event, right? And what that means is, for instance, people have made the argument, you can watch the Instagram reel over and over again that's portraying some type of violent encounter with somebody that you know or somebody that maybe you don't know. But repeated exposure to these events could also count towards exposure criteria. 2, the intrusion symptoms. Those are the memories, the dreams, the flashbacks, the physical reaction to cues. Those are very important. And I believe the DSM, it says only the presence of one or more of those intrusion symptoms are required. So you don't need all of the intrusion symptoms, you only need one or more. And unfortunately, some people are dealing with all of them. You know, I've dealt with all of the symptoms over a period of time, maybe not all at once, but the memories, the dreams, the flashbacks, the moments where you feel like you're reliving that event all over again, right? 3, the persistent avoidance of stimuli related to that event, right? So we're talking about efforts to avoid distressing memories and thoughts. You're consciously making an effort to avoid these things, right? You're consciously making an effort to avoid, pardon me, I had to fix my battery. You're consciously making an effort to avoid external reminders of this event, right? Like I said, people, places, things, even times a day, I would throw in there. You're avoiding anything associated with that. 4, negative cognition and mood. This is huge. And there are 7 criteria to fall into that, so just bear with me. You can't remember important aspects of the event, right? B, persistent exaggerated beliefs. That was me all the way. At age 10, witnessed that murder, immediately I said, oh, this is the gang violence that everybody's been talking about. These are the shootings that everybody said happens in the neighborhood. I just hadn't seen it. And so me witnessing another high school age student shoot another high school age student at point blank range in the face on the basketball court, I walked away with that experience feeling like, okay, well, that's probably going to be my outcome in life. I'll probably be on a basketball court somewhere and something might happen to me. That's an exaggerated negative belief that was not true, right? And it's persistent, right? Persistence is the key. Persistent, distorted cognition about the cause and consequences of that event. Negative emotional state. Diminished interest in activities. I'm on 5 now. 6, feelings of detachment and estrangement. And feelings of the inability to experience positive emotion. Those are 7 symptoms that many people are coping with on a daily basis, right? And cannabis helps mitigate all of these symptoms, particularly when used in the appropriate dosage at the appropriate times with the appropriate stimuli and environment all in play. Set and setting are so important on top of the dose and the type of cannabis you're using. So I'm not going to sit here and sell you a dream. Some people are using cannabis, they're using the wrong strain at the wrong amount, at the wrong time, with the wrong stimuli, in the wrong setting, and they're getting that paranoia, they're getting that persistent, hyper vigilance, and that's not good. So at the end of the day, cannabis is not for everybody. And I want to make sure I'm clear about that. I want people to have the information so that they can make their own informed decision. But cannabis, when used at the right dosage, in the right set and setting, can mitigate all of these symptoms and the ones I'm about to get into later. So 5, our last criteria, alterations in arousal and reactivity. This is huge, and this could be the most pronounced because sometimes those of us coping with post-traumatic stress, we deal with the following symptoms: irritable behavior, reckless and self-destructive behavior, hypervigilance. Ooh, that was me real bad. Exaggerated startle response, concentration problems, and sleep disturbance. When I tell you at one point or another, I have dealt with each one of these symptoms, sometimes all at once, and it can be very overwhelming. And when I tell you that cannabis, like I say, used at the right dose, at the right time, in the right setting, can mitigate these symptoms. You talk about irritable behavior. Cannabis can clearly put you in a better mood. You talk about reckless, self-destructive behavior. Cannabis can clearly keep you present, centered, and in the moment to where you realize and understand that the behavior that I'm engaging in is reckless, self-destructive, and dangerous, right? Because oftentimes, those of us coping with post-traumatic stress, we feel that there is impending doom. We feel that the end is near, so why give it a shot anyway, right? And so you engage in this self-destructive behavior because going back to our negative cognition and mood, you have exaggerated, persistent negative beliefs about your life and outcomes, right? So your negative, persistent, exaggerated beliefs lead to your self-destructive behavior. They go hand in hand. And cannabis is able to let you pull all of that back and sit there and center yourself and say, you know what? I'm really having a good time sitting here smoking my bud, minding my business. That moments like that can take you out of this post-traumatic stress haze of negativity, right? Hypervigilance. This is huge. Being hypervigilant. We all know that person. I was that guy. You got to sit in the shooter's seat in the restaurant. You got to sit in the corner with both walls to the side of you where nobody can encroach upon you from behind. You got to know where all the exits are. You got to know where all the entrances are, ingress and egress. Where am I going to leave if a shooting happens? Where am I going to take my family and duck for cover if something catastrophic takes place? Hypervigilance. But thinking in that way on a regular basis can be overwhelming. It can be a burden. Every time you go in a restaurant, you're thinking exits, you're thinking protection, you're thinking, what if I get shot? What if I have to shoot somebody, right? These recurring, persistent thoughts running through your mind all day long. Exaggerated startle response. So, when you're responding to external stimuli that might remind you of the traumatic event, your startle response is very exaggerated, and that's very common. Concentration problems. This is where I discovered cannabis 20 years ago on the side of the library, Woodruff Library in the Atlanta University Center. Shout out to Morehouse College. You see the degree in the back. Listen, I remember like it was yesterday, I smoked probably about 0.2 to 0.3. It was a roach of a blunt I had from earlier in the day. And when I tell you I went into that library and I was laser focused for about 6 hours, when I would typically only be in there maybe like 2, it changed my life. I understood that night that this is not a recreational substance. This is a substance that can be used to benefit us in a number of different ways. I mean, society knew that, but that was my own personal discovery, right? And then finally, sleep disturbances. That's huge. That's something I still cope with to this day. I wouldn't say I have nightmares, but I have very busy dreams where I'm being chased. I'm chasing somebody. I'm shooting at somebody. Somebody's shooting at me. Sleep disturbances are, I would say, one of the hallmarks of post-traumatic stress because it can also lead to anxiety the next day, right? We already know that sleep is the hallmark of health. When our sleep is healthy, we're healthy. When our sleep is not good, we are not good. And so post-traumatic stress kills people and it kills their sleep. When I say kills people, I mean kills their spirit, right? Kills their motivation, kills their drive, kills their will to survive and thrive and push through the hard times. Post-traumatic stress can really get in the way of that. But guess what? Cannabis mitigates all of the symptoms in terms of arousal reactivity. When we talk about irritable behavior, reckless self-destructive behavior, hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response, concentration problems, sleep disturbances, cannabis mitigates all these things. And so at the end of the day, it's not rocket science. Basically, what I'm saying is when cannabis is used intentionally, intellectually, at the right dose, at the right time, we can decrease the severity of all these symptoms. I'm a firm believer that there's no cure for post-traumatic stress. I'm a firm believer that this is something that we cope with in our over the course of our lifespan, in our healing process, right? And so it's important to remember 5 criteria of post-traumatic stress, all of the symptoms, but remember that cannabis helps mitigate our symptoms by reducing the severity of each one of those, particularly if you are using cannabis in a mindful way where you're stepping in to your use and your routine with the understanding that, okay, I want to get some sleep. I'm going to use my cannabis in this way. Okay, I'm going out to eat. I don't want to be anxious. And I don't want to be irritable. I don't want to be hyper vigilant. I want to relax. So I'm gonna use my cannabis in a way that when I sit down in this restaurant, I'm not gonna be concerned about every single person coming in and out, who's sitting to my right, who's sitting to my left. And don't get it twisted. You should be aware of these things, but there's a big gap between awareness and hypervigilance. And we gotta fall in between somewhere, right? In order to just keep ourselves and our families safe. So look, I hope this content was helpful for you. It's been a long 15 minutes. I thank you for watching and listening. And look out for my next content, because I feel like I need to take a deeper dive on individual symptoms and how we can use different strategies and methods to reduce the severity of the individual symptoms that we cope with on a daily basis, right? Because this is something that many of us face every day. Every day we wake up wondering if today's going to be our last day. Every day we go from point A to point B wondering what's going to happen. Am I going to have to hurt somebody? Is somebody going to hurt me? Every day we're dealing with hypervigilance, irritable behavior, memories, flashbacks. So this is important, right? And so everybody jump in my DMs, communicate with me. Let's have this ongoing conversation. I think I'm gonna start going live maybe once a week so we can start really having a more in-depth clinical conversation about it. And just have a great day, man. It's Tuesday. Let's go.